How can a team like Ferrari, with 2 world champions and a factory car, fall into mince just when promised? What is behind the disaster we saw in Singapore Q3? Today we reveal the real secret that Ferrari does not want you to know about his car. In the timesheets, Ferrari did not lead, but was close enough to project a real threat. Under empty tank conditions and soft gums, both pilots remained within 2/10 with respect to the reference time of Lando Norris, which, in a circuit as technical as Marina Bay, was practically equivalent to equal conditions. Even the minimum curve analysis, a key parameter in this type of layout, placed SF25 as one of the best on Friday. But what really fed optimism was the consistency of the rhythm in a long round. The Hamilton stints, in particular, showed a controlled degradation, something unusual considering the history of the SF25 with the rear train overheating. For the technical team, this was interpreted as a sign that they had finally found a sweet point between aerodynamics, balance, and thermal management, just at the most necessary moment of the calendar. In Ferrari's box, the atmosphere was of hopeful containment. No one talked about pole, but to be in the direct fight, of being in the conversation. Vasseur insisted on the briefings in not overlapping, but internally there was a clear perception that, this time, they had material to compete. What none of them knew, even with all the sensors lit, was that Friday's performance had been a carefully constructed illusion about 2 ideal conditions. The track temperature was slightly higher than the historical average of the circuit. The wind was practically null. Traffic on the track had been favorable. All these little factors converged to disguise the true nature of the SF25, a car that, under real classification, had not yet been truly tested. No simulation, however detailed, can replicate the thermal stress and emotional load of a return of Q3. And that, Ferrari would discover it in the worst possible way less than 24 hours later. When the clock marked the start of the Q3, Ferrari already knew that he was entering compromised territory. The evolution of the track had been progressive but treacherous. The relative humidity increased minute by minute, and although the asphalt temperature remained relatively stable, below 32 degrees Celsius, the thermal environment of the Marina Bay circuit began to punish with brutal precision any car that did not know how to correctly heat its tires. Ferrari opted for a conservative but apparently logical strategy, launching their cars at the end of the Pittsburgh lane to avoid traffic on its fast laps. The idea on paper made sense. Less traffic means less interruptions and more likely to complete a clean turn. However, what they did not calculate or did it wrong was the time that the tires would be exposed to passive cooling in the boxes and during the slow route until the beginning of the launched return. The result was a loss of between 5 and 6 degrees Celsius in the surface temperature of the tires. This figure may seem insignificant for the casual spectator, but in Formula One it represents a world of difference. A rubber that does not reach its ideal thermal window does not generate grip. It does not respond to the address entry. It does not behave as designed. It is in essence a useless tool in the hands of pilots accustomed to working in millimeters and hundredths. The SF25 not only lost adhesion, he lost dynamic balance. The rear of the car, which already came with stability problems from the tests in Mugello, became unpredictable. In the case of Hamilton, the telemetry data showed a sudden increase of more than 3 degrees in the right rear tire housing in the middle of their fast return. This not only reduced the general grip, but also caused a thermal differential that destabilized the traction in the exit of the low-speed curves. Hamilton explained it rarely in his post-classification interview. "I had nothing. I lost half a second just because of the tires." But what your phrase hides is even more revealing. The British tried to compensate for that temperature loss with a more aggressive preparation return, but that only prematurely degraded the compound. Ferrari had been caught in a non-exit dilemma. If they tried to heat the gums, they destroyed them. If they kept them, they did not reach temperature. In both cases, they lost. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, opted for a more discharged configuration in search of greater speed, sacrificing curve support. In theory, this choice could give an advantage in the long line of Sector 3. But in practice, what he obtained was a car that simply did not respond as it owed in slow areas, where mechanical grip is everything. The lack of rear aerodynamic support in cold tires conditions made him a passenger rather than a pilot. The thermal catastrophe was not an isolated event. It was the clear manifestation of a repetitive pattern that Ferrari has failed to resolve throughout the season. From Azerbaijan to Singapore, through the night batches in the preseason tests, the SF SF25 has shown again and again its inability to generate temperature efficiently when environmental conditions demand it. It is not a strategy failure, it is a concept failure. The rear axle is the trusted anchor of every pilot. It is what allows us to accelerate early at the curve outlet, keep the car aligned in traction, and support with strong braking. In the SF25, that anchor is corroded. Telemetry sessions have registered load oscillations and erratic weight transfer in acceleration braking transitions. And the most serious, these oscillations do not respond to classic configuration settings such as braking distribution, differential, or motor mapping. They are symptoms of a deep imbalance, probably linked to the rear aerodynamic package and the kinematics of the suspension. This problem especially affects Lewis Hamilton. The 7-time world champion has built its driving style on a base that requires surgical precision in the rotation of the car. His talent lies in stopping late, rotating aggressively, and accelerating at the exact point where others are still stabilizing the car. But to execute that style, you need a solid, stable rear train that reacts predictably. With the SF25, Hamilton does not find that support. On the contrary, he finds a car that moves under him as if he were stepping on a table on wet sand. He tried to compensate him from the first moment. In the Singapore classification, his technical team opted for a setup with greater rear aerodynamic load. This subtracted up to 6 km/h in tip speed in front of Leclerc, but gave it greater poise in the slow areas of the circuit. The result was partial. It gained some confidence, but not enough to attack the limit. And when the tires stopped performing in the second half of the turn, the fragile stability of the car betrayed it again. Leclerc, on the other hand, opted for a more balanced configuration, sacrificing support in straight speed curve. But that decision did nothing but show that without a rear train that guarantees support, even its most fluid and adaptive style is neutralized. The root of the problem seems to be in a design philosophy that prioritized the balance in wind tunnel above the dynamic stability on the royal track. Ferrari looked for a neutral, efficient, aerodynamically clean car. But that search led them to create a platform too sensitive to external changes: temperature, wind, side load. In practice, this means a car that only yields when almost perfect conditions are given. And in Formula One, these conditions do not exist. To top it off, the comparative data with the Mugello and Azerbaijan tests show a worrying pattern. Every time the car is subjected to strong longitudinal loads, either in long braking or low, speed accelerations appear in stability peaks that translate into steering wheel microcorrections, traction losses, and asymmetric wear of rear tires. This not only harms the time for return, but erodes the confidence of the pilot return to return. We are, therefore, before a design problem that is not solved with a couple of aerodynamic updates. It is not a matter of spoilers or diffusers. It is a matter of platform, of concept, how the car was conceived in its purest essence. And for a team like Ferrari, which came from a positive progression in 2024, this is a devastating blow. What happened in the Singapore classification was not only the reflection of a technical problem. It was the symptom of something broader, more systemic, which goes beyond the car and has its roots in the very bowels of the Ferrari organization. Because when a team repeats the same errors under different conditions, with different pilots and divergent strategies, the conclusion is inevitable. The problem is no longer only on the track, but in the operational culture that supports it. The calendar does not help. After Singapore, they are even more demanding in thermal and traction terms, such as the United States, Mexico, or Brazil. Circuits where rear axle overheating, the difficulty in heating gums and traction phase instability are accentuated. Ferrari cannot be allowed that what happened in Marina Bay is repeated. Internally, engineers have begun to divide the SF25 project into two parallel branches, one focused on rescuing what can be of the current season, and another that already thinks about the 2026 chassis. This division of efforts is not ideal. It means that part of the engineering, simulation resources, wind tunnel hours will no longer be completely available to evolve the current car. But Ferrari knows that if he does not change the approach from now on, he will be late for the next great regulatory change. And that is a mistake that cannot be allowed to repeat. I invite you to reflect. Do you think Ferrari has room to react this same season? Or is it time to accept that SF25 is not a winning car and that you have to look at 2026? What would you do if you were in the place of Vasseur, Hamilton, or Leclerc? Leave it in the comments.